Well, welcome to Fireside. We're very happy today to have another great interview for you with Amanda Medina, this Adoptee Life blogger extraordinaire, who's agreed graciously to spend time with us this afternoon and speak to us as a fellow adoptee, as a transnational, transracial adoptee, and about her experience around her adoption, how it's been growing up, situations that she's been a frequent interviewer on other forums, and has had some, I think, developments more recently in her life that maybe she hasn't spoken about more directly or had the opportunity to since some of those interviews were recorded. So what we'd like to do again is thank you again very much for joining us, Amanda. We're grateful that you're here. Everyone's very excited to have the chance to hear your story. So I'd like to just go over some of the questions that I had after spending a lot of time on your blog, listening to your Adoptees On interview, and just corresponding with you a little bit here and there, that I think I have an idea of what sorts of things that are of interest to me. And I certainly want to give you the space to talk about things that are important to you in your story as well. So the first thing I like, usually when we do these interviews, there's something routine about asking somebody, where were you born and when? And there's a difficulty in that question for you that some of us don't face. Would you be able to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. And before I answer that, I just want to say thank you for having me. I was honored to be invited, and I haven't done any of these interviews or chats in quite a while. So I was a little extra nervous logging in this morning, or it's morning here, it's just going to afternoon where it's noon here in San Diego. But I'm very excited, and I hope to be able to share from my experience in ways that might be inspiring, might give hope, might provide comfort and validation for fellow adoptees. So to answer your question, yes, when we get asked, I think adoptees in general, but as a transnational adoptee specifically, being asked, where are you from? Which is a very general question, or even where were you born? It always comes with this need for almost explain. I can't just say, oh, I'm from Colombia. That's where I was born, right? And I feel if I just say that and leave it blank, I feel like people expect me to be Colombian, which I don't act, well, I do sometimes, but I didn't grow up Colombian. I grew up Swedish because I was adopted to Sweden. And so what I've done actually over the years of trying to take ownership of my story and really empower myself when I talk about adoption, when I talk about my own experience as an adoptee, is I started a while ago to not even mention adoption when I tell my story. So my standard answer goes something along these lines. I say, I was born in Colombia, supposedly sometime in 1984. And I don't know anything about the first 2 years of my life. I lost my family as a baby. Anyone who would have been familiar to me, I don't know when, I don't know where, I don't know how, I don't know why. And I don't even know what day I was born. And then when I was around 2 years old, I was brought to a new country. And with that, all my ties, all my connection to anything that would have been familiar to me as a baby was broken and cut. And instead, I was taken to grow up in a place where everything would have been foreign: language, smells, taste, everything. And because a Swedish couple had decided to adopt a baby girl from Colombia. And so that's all I know. And so the story that I have in my papers, I don't recite that as my story because I can't prove that that's true. It might be a lie. And so I've taken ownership of my story that way by telling the facts as I know them and starting at the very beginning. I don't start with I'm adopted. I start with I was born and whatever I know to be true in the first 2 years of my life, which is very little, but it's all I have. So I grab onto that. And I tell you, it has empowered me tremendously to tell my story that way. And I get different reactions from when just saying, oh yeah, I was born in Colombia and then I was adopted to Sweden. The conversations that follow, it kind of opens the door for questions that aren't oh, well, isn't that wonderful? And oh, do you still know your biological family? Or no, it's instead like, wow, that's what you went through. And oh my goodness, people kind of connect to the trauma of it all right away in a very different way. So I really wanted to share that because I think it's so important for us adoptees to, I talk a lot about taking ownership of our story, and not just repeat what we've been told.
That's, yeah, that's great. And of course, we have people on the call who are also transnational, transracial adoptees, and I know they're very eager to hear more about, from that perspective, the sense of total loss,
Yeah.
not just of your identity, but your whole cultural identity, your language, your whole heritage, and even more specifically about, quite honestly, growing up with a people that looked a lot different than you did, for sure. And I know there are other people on the call who can relate to that, but I feel like that must be an especially deep loss for an adoptee who's a transnational or transracial adoptee.
Yeah, for me, because I was, and I think we're gonna maybe go into this later, but I've called myself a compliant adoptee deep in the fog. That's what I see when I look back on growing up, and I think it cushioned me in many ways. I've said many times, I've never experienced racism like, towards me specifically, personally. I know it exists. It exists everywhere. It exists in Sweden for sure, but me personally, and I don't know whether that was because I just didn't hear it, realize it, see it, because I thought of myself as fitting right in.
Mhm.
But yes, absolutely. There were definitely also growing up, there were times when zero representation matter. Like it makes a difference. It affects you. Where all my friends looked a certain way and I developed differently and earlier, and I didn't fit the beauty standards, so to speak, in Sweden, because I'm not blonde, I'm not tall, I'm not skinny, which today I own all of my Latina traits, but growing up it was hard. I remember like wanting straight hair because all my friends had straight hair, and
Mhm.
the little things, and then not being able to really talk about that with my mother. The way them I see my daughters can come to me, and things happen to them and I can relate right away without them having to ask questions. I can say, oh yeah, I was like that at your age too, or
Mhm.
those kind of things for sure. But I've realized it more as an adult looking back. That was part of my coming out of the fog, more so than my experience growing up, because I wasn't really aware of it
Yeah.
same
But
way.
one of my previous bosses was from Bangladesh and grew up in Sweden, and she
Mm,
was a little petite,
yeah.
darkly complected lady, and experienced some of the same things. She was not an adoptee, but she talked about this as well.
Yeah.
And it's such a stark contrast. If you think of anything that's more, that if you can think of anything more Northern European than Sweden, I don't know what it would be, just in terms
Yeah.
of, like you said, ideals, the beauty standards of what people look like, their height,
Yeah.
stature. I'm sure that
And then
it had a
I'm
lot.
sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but I
Oh,
just
no, no, go
realized,
ahead,
because I
please.
think for me it was more on a cultural and
Okay.
like my personality level. Like I speak, I'm loud. I am passionate. I often felt like I was told I was too intense. Um, when I get angry, it's like it's a thunderstorm coming through. It's quick, but it's intense. And then, but when I'm happy, I'm super happy. I love hard. I get angry really hard. It's a lot, which like you mentioned the opposites there, like Sweden and Colombia. I don't know if you can get more different in terms of social norms and just how people behave. And so that was definitely a struggle for me growing up, and just always feeling like I could not be my full self. I could not just behave, ask myself. I always had to tone down. I always had to make myself smaller for
Diminish
sure.
yourself, right? In a way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Or contain what your natural expression of yourself should
Yeah,
be.
absolutely. And I've learned, nowadays they say, no, I wasn't intense. I was passionate. I'm a passionate person. It's just, and I see it in my daughter. And instead of telling her like, oh, be more quiet, be more, no, it's like, oh, that's awesome. Like you're so
Yeah.
loving, you're so happy, you're a sunshine. And oh, I can see you're really angry. Like I get that. I get like that too. So yeah.
What was it like for you to decide to learn your native language? What would have been your native language?
Yeah.
Uh,
So part of it was just having to, because in Sweden you learn English as a second language from a young age. And then we got the choice to learn a third, or everybody has to learn a third language. And we were the first, my generation was the first to actually get to choose Spanish.
oh,
So not being interested, German and French were the other ones before that.
mhm.
And I didn't feel connected to that, obviously. So I chose Spanish. And then I got to live in Spain for 1 year where I was able to become fluent, like move past just like the school Spanish. Um, it's been interesting because I can speak Spanish, but I don't speak Colombian Spanish because I didn't learn it in Colombia. So there's still that element of disconnect where yes, I have the advantage if I go to Colombia that I don't need an interpreter. I won't necessarily struggle and stumble and feel like a complete outsider because I will understand it. But as soon as I open my mouth, I'm made on the spot. Like, oh yeah, you're not, you look Colombian, but I can hear you're not. Um, so it's an advantage, but it's still a source of disconnect. It's not, it doesn't bring, and that's the thing, language is a lot. Um, but just having lost the entire experience of growing up in my country around my people, I don't know what would possibly really remedy that.
Yeah,
Or
it's an erasure. Uh,
yeah,
the everything gone. I imagine it's devastating in so many ways, and that people can, I'm sure, relate to that who have been through something similar. I know
yeah,
there are people who have also chosen to learn Spanish who should have, in a sense,
mhm,
known Spanish as their birthright, as where they were from, and
yeah,
had to learn it later on without that cultural immersion and everything that was part of the birthright of who you were. I
yeah,
wanted,
for sure.
I'm glad you brought up already the compliant adoptee. I know that's something we want to explore for sure, because that definitely describes how I was growing up. And in your blog, you've talked about simultaneously being compliant and defiant, in the sense of holding your adoptive parents at a distance, which that was interesting to me, because I can hear the passion in what you say, and
Mhm.
in the way you communicate, and what you've said about your daughter, and part of your heritage and culture. And I'm wondering how those conflicted in you as a compliant adoptee, and what kind of conflict that made for you internally.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak on that. So I was outwardly very compliant. I was always very careful to not ruffle any feathers, not push any limits, not get in any kind of trouble. And so obviously I always got to hear, you're so independent, you're so reliable, you're so responsible, all these great things that didn't sit right with me, but I couldn't tell you why. It was
Mhm.
just, I cringed. And I cringed the most when the woman who adopted me, when she would say that. I it really like, I couldn't, but I didn't know why, so I couldn't express it. And so that was a huge source of guilt, because on the inside I was defined in the sense that I did not let them in. um,
Mhm.
I realized at a young age that if I was to be in a store and all of a sudden not see them, I wouldn't freak out. I would just kind of be like, okay, freak out more because of being alone than not having them around, which I also understood was not how it's supposed to be, right? When you're a little girl, you're not supposed to feel like, well, if the people that I call my parents aren't around, like I'm totally fine with that. Um, and I kind of grew up doing what I wanted to do, but being smart about it. So I was not an angel in any kind of way, but I made sure that they never found out. Um, and on the flip side of that, the boy that they adopted, he was the opposite. He was very outwardly rebellious and just but then that took up a lot of their time and attention, and I didn't get as much. There's just so many layers to all of that. But I think in hindsight, it's a source of grief and sorrow for sure to look back and realize that as a child, I didn't have what a child needs and deserves, and that what every child should have, emotionally safe place in their home with their parents. But on the flip side, the silver lining of that is that I never felt constrained. I never felt like I needed their approval for any decision that I've made in my life. I've grown up just knowing from a young age, I'm not going to stay in Sweden. I have nothing holding me here. I'm going to move as soon as I can. And I did. I packed my bags at 20 and moved to the US on a
Wow.
international student visa, and have stayed since. So there's both, right? For me, I've later in life taken ownership of everything that is my life. And that's what we can talk a little more about when it comes to certain changes I've gone through in the most recent year. But yeah.
That's really insightful as well. And I think it leads into, you talked about the depth of the fog and the compliance. And there was a quote that I read on your blog. When I was younger, I would tell everyone I didn't care to know. That was the quote. And then you also said right after that, but it really wasn't that you didn't want to know. You just were afraid of being rejected. And could you talk about what you didn't care to know, and then what it was like when you realized, oh, I'm just afraid of rejection at this point, and then also the element of whether or not you think adoptees tend to use a coping mechanism like this for, because I did, telling myself and other people, I don't want to know about my family. That's what I meant by I don't want to know. But did that mean the same thing for you?
Yeah, I think part of it was being told, or if I look at my paperwork, it would sound as if I have no chance of knowing, I have no chance of finding, because the story that's in there is some random woman dropped me off at the police station. There's no name for her. There's no name for the police officer. There's nothing for me to go on if I chose one day to like really dig into a search, which at the time I thought, well, that means I have nothing. I can't find anything. And so why even try? I know today things are different with DNA tests, with private investigators, with, I know ways that people with less information than me might still be able to find if they choose to search. So that's one thing that I think there's nothing there for me to even, why bother? And then I definitely think it was a coping mechanism for sure. How do you embark on searching for a needle in a haystack, and not be scared of complete failure and just additional heartbreak and just not being able to actually find anything, or find out things that you might not want to know. Like, I don't know what happened to me the first 2 years. How was I even brought into this world? The result of two people loving each other, the result of something, way more uncomfortable and hurtful. So there's all these different things playing into, I think, why I didn't even let myself consider that an option, knowing what amount of time and effort and potential heartache would come out of that. And then, of course, part of it is just feeling like you shouldn't, you've gotten a better life, which I never really felt like I did, but that's the narrative. And so how do you argue with that when you're one lonely adoptee, not knowing where your feelings come from, where your reactions come from, where your entire experience really is? Because again, I was deep in the fog. So the idea was, I'm fine. I'm totally fine. The only one struggling is the other kid, because he's being all rebellious and doing all these bad things. But I'm getting good grades. I'm doing fine. I have a lot of friends, and so I think I felt a lot like I just shouldn't. And then what were your other questions? It was
Well, I think you've answered the question about adoptees do that as a coping mechanism.
Yeah, for sure.
I had asked about what it meant for you to say you didn't want to know, and you've explained that to us as rolled up in a lot of pain of, I'm not going to find out anyway, am I? So
Yeah.
why would I put myself through that or subject myself to that potential disappointment? So I'll just tell myself I'm okay for now. And that leads exactly into the next question, which is what you said, which is, and I hear this from other adoptees, that they say, I was fine until I was no longer fine.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's an event, sometimes it's a series of events, but I think that resonates with you based on what I've learned of your story. Could you talk about a moment or a time when you said, I'm not okay after all? I thought I was, but I don't think so anymore.
Absolutely. So I actually have a specific day and moment. I went from, so I've always been a very happy person, like to look on life from the bright side and stay positive. And I have to admit that for a while I was one of those, toxic positivity kind of, just smile and everything will be great. What is there to complain about? Just switch your mindset and everything's fine. And when life gives you lemons, and then life gave me lemons, and I did not make no damn lemonade. I was hit with anxiety out of nowhere. I didn't know it was anxiety. I just one day standing at the in the kitchen, just felt this pressure in my chest, tingling in my fingers. I felt like I need to either hit something or get in my car and drive really fast and blast music really loud. And it was just crawling, and my head was just filled with I don't even know what. And I was telling my husband, and he said, that sounds like anxiety. And I said, anxiety? No, I don't have it. Don't even talk about that. I don't want to hear that. I'm going to go take a nap. And then from there, it happened again. And then I got anger outbursts anytime things would be too much, a situation that I felt I couldn't handle, whether that was my kids not listening or whatever it may have been, different situations where it was just, oh, it's dinner time and my husband's trying to talk to me and there's a lot of things going on at once, and I would just blow like, ah, and I would get angry. And I didn't recognize that. I'm like, that's not me. This is not normal behavior for me. And I'm very self-reflective, and I want to understand. I analyze myself, my experience, my life. And so I said, there's something here. I need to look at what's going on. And I started kind of tracing back, and I landed on maybe it's the adoption. Maybe there's something there. And I told my husband, I think I need to maybe dig into that. And I was scared. I even told him, I said, I'm really, really scared because I have no idea what's going to come out of that. So I think on some level, I knew that there was a lot there that I had pushed down, deep down, and not dealt with ever. And I knew if I even go scratching a little bit, it has the risk of just coming out. And if it does, I don't know what to do. And that is kind of what happened. And then I started connecting with other adoptees, and I started coming out of the fog. And in a way, I felt like I didn't realize that that's what was happening until it was too late to say, no, I don't want to deal with this. It was, the ball was rolling, and it was happening. And it was like, either give up or keep going. And between the two, I had 2 kids, a husband, a life. And I do love life. So giving up was not an option for me. But I can definitely see how for some, it's just, it gets to be too much. I struggled. Coming out of the fog was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. It was grief, every step of grief, because I realized I had to let part of myself, or most of myself even, die off so that I could build myself back up. And that meant letting go of the things I didn't like, but also letting go of things that I did like about myself. And that I was not prepared for that. I was not prepared for having to grieve myself, the loss of Amanda, prior to digging into adoption.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I experienced it the same way. In terms of, it felt like what was left of me and what had to go And how on earth was I going to build something new to go in there?
Yeah.
And I didn't know. And it led me to, I came out of the fog through the adoptee community, through
Same.
the interactions with adoptees and seeing, oh, this is really what people are talking about. And suddenly it happened to me, like literally in an instant. And I know you've related to connecting with people in person and online and what that was like for you. Could you talk a little bit about that for your
Yeah.
adoptee support?
So that was part of the beginning of my journey, was to go online, go on Facebook, because I was like, after a lifetime of being the only person I knew, feeling the way I did, and as a result, feeling like there's probably something wrong with me. Why am I not connecting to these people that adopted me, that are on paper? They're my family. For all I know, they're the only people that I can call mom and dad, because they're the only ones I know in that role. And feeling like other adoptees are saying that life is great and they're happy they got the chance to be in Sweden, and all these things. And then so I went on Facebook and searched people adopted from Colombia or something like that, and found a group with, at the time I think it was 1,500 members. And that just took me by surprise, because in an instant there were 1,500 other people in the world who were talking about things that I had felt my entire life, who knew more about adoption than I did. And it was overwhelming. It was validating, but it was also overwhelming, because this is where I learned about where I for the first time heard about adoption and trauma and trafficking and falsification and all these, the dark side, let's call it the dark side of adoption, as an industry, and the money interests and all these things. And at first I rejected that. I said, no, I'm not trying to hear that. Like, I was not ready to sort of accept that that was even a possibility. I thought, what are they talking about? Like, why are they complaining so much? And, all that. But again, I was going through stuff. I couldn't just say, so I started digging, I started reading, I started really listening, and I understood there's something there. And I learned a lot in that group. And I just want to say, Kate, who's in here, she's one of the people who did speak, who I've learned a lot from, who was one of the first to kind of, that I saw an adoptee take ownership and speak of their experience and survive it. Because that was the thing. I felt like, if I start talking, how will I survive the possible rejection? What will that even look like? And so seeing other adoptees doing that and kind of following their footsteps in little snippets, like just starting by posting in that group and having people pour into me by saying, thank you for sharing this. I felt that way too. Or you just put words to an experience I didn't know how to express. And then I started the blog and getting feedback from that. I think the adoptee community or the adoptee centered spaces online have been huge in my healing and in my processing. What I do tell people when they first come in is find your people within the larger community, because while we're all adoptees, we don't agree on everything. We have different religious views, we have different political views, and it's all okay. But I think you get a little naive when you first find other adoptees. If you've never had that in your life, so it's like, oh yay, now we're BFFs and it's great and I can tell you everything. And then I've seen it and I've been pretty cautious. I haven't felt it personally, but this idea that you can trust just because we're fellow adoptees, and then get sort of burned, because at the end of the day, we're still individuals, and all of our experiences are very individual. And just be a little cautious that even though we are fellow adoptees and we can definitely support one another, find your people, because that's where you're really going to be able to be yourself and speak freely in a way that will empower you and sort of build this confidence that I think we deserve and can definitely, it's possible. But it takes a little bit of just being aware, like very self-aware, and check in with yourself.
Yeah. Here's what I wanted to bring to you, which is I grew up in Escondido, which for everybody who doesn't know is a city in San Diego County. you have a great story about meeting two Colombian adoptees in Escondido that were it was like a seminal moment for you. I don't know if they were the first time you had connected with people in person, but could you talk about that just for a minute?
Oh yeah. Yeah, that was 2017 or 18, I'm not sure. But yeah, it was through the Facebook group. And it was the first time I sat down with fellow adoptees, fellow Colombian adoptees at that, who just in sharing their, or even just asking certain questions like, oh, did you ever feel like this? Or, well, here's my experience. And just being able to feel it's not just me.
Mhm.
That it was huge, for sure. And this was before I started the blog. This was at the very, very, very beginning, before I spoke comfortably about my story or my experience, because I had not even unpacked enough to talk much about it. But just sitting down and hearing from them
Yeah.
was, and I think one thing I learned also was how, even though, going back to the transnational adoptee aspect, they sort of embraced their Colombian side far more than I had ever done, and kind of like claimed Colombia as theirs in a way that I'd never felt like I really could. And still today kind of struggle a bit with, because I have this kind of weird internal struggle towards Colombia as the country that didn't fight enough for me to keep me. They let me go. But also feeling like if I go there, I'll probably fit right in and I'll feel at home. So it's, yeah.
Come to a greater awareness of just what you said here, which is that there are countries that let go of their children, and that for domestic adoptees, we don't think about that as much. That there was a government and a nation that said our children can go somewhere else. There, I don't know what how to properly describe that, but that was a revelation to me. I hadn't thought about that, and you must, as you just described, have feelings about what that means to you in relationship to Colombia as a nation and not fighting for you. That's kind of tragic, I think. And I know it's happening all over the place as I keep reading more and more about it. But that was a level of awareness I didn't previously have. So thank you for that as well. Would you like to talk about biofamily or the attempts? I know you said you had nothing to go on at all, but that didn't stop you from engaging in search to some degree.
Yeah. So when they first came out with these DNA tests, my husband asked me like, "Oh, do you want to take one? Like, could be cool to find out." And I said, "No, no interest whatsoever." And he was kind of scratching his head, not understanding how would you not want to know if you maybe could. But again, coping mechanism, just kind of not being ready for that. But then once I did, so there was this one instant where I was in communication with a woman on a completely different topic, but she said, "Hey, I don't know if you believe in coincidences, but here's a funny story. My best friend is from Medellin, which is the same city I was born in, and her last name is the same as yours was in Colombia." And that made it click for me and go, wait a minute, I have people out there who I am related to. There are people in Colombia that are my family that I have, genetically connected to. And so I went home and said, hey, buy the test. And so my husband bought the family tree DNA and I took it, and I have 500 plus cousins, but all distant cousins, obviously. But when you're somebody who never had anything, it's, we have 1% of a drop of blood that we share. Well, prima, like you're my cousin. What else do you need? But I have no close relatives yet, but who knows? My information is there. Maybe one day someone will email me and say, hey, we matched on the DNA and I might be your half sister. Who knows? For now, I'm just sitting there. The jury's still out on whether or not I'll engage in a full blown go search for first family. And I think because I also, I have kids and I want to involve them. So
Yeah.
We'll see. It's all still not decided, but I did connect with one distant cousin, and we kind of came out of the fog together.
Oh,
And that was a really helpful part, I think, of my coming out of the fog. We would be on the phone, for hours every day and just go through it together. And looking back, I don't know where I would be if that wouldn't have been the case, if I wouldn't have had her. And we went about it very differently. She dived deep into searching, and I was more like, well, I just need to work on myself first. And we've stayed close throughout.
and I think you had a picture of her on your blog,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, that
Yeah,
was
she's there.
special. Would you say you've had, or what would you say would be the biggest struggle you've had personally as an adoptee?
Growing up, I would say, was the guilt, all that guilt that I carried, from not feeling like I was a good enough daughter to be able to say I love you, to the people that adopted me, who at the time were the people I called my parents. Um, for feeling, like I mentioned before, for just not feeling connected, for not feeling like I needed them, for kind of just waiting and wishing for the day that I would be old enough to move and put a distance emotionally, psychologically, and physically. That's not my daughter's. Well, my oldest, she's kind of at that point where she's starting to, claim independence, but my little one is still very much like, I will live with you forever, mother. I will never move away. What are you talking about? I will never have my own place. I always want to live with you. And I never felt that. I don't know what that feeling is like to feel that way um, towards your parents. So just the guilt of feeling like I was acting one way outwardly and feeling a different way on the inside. And knowing that I wasn't fake, I just didn't want to show up. These were not the people. I didn't trust that they would be able to be there for me emotionally, which they actually did prove they couldn't. So just always kind of at arm's length, and I'm here while I have to, and then ciao, and have a nice life. And that, a lot of guilt in that. And then coming out of the fog, I would say that's been the biggest struggle of all of them, because it was for me about, so I remember 1 year in saying like, oh yeah, I think, I'm kind of okay now. And then realizing, looking back today, I was only about half. That's when it started. That's when it really, like, the floodgates really opened and Pandora's box. I had just unlocked it, and that's when it really flew open. So about 2 years plus of just really having to face what had been my life, all the stuff I had shoved down, and then really having to break down to the core, in order to build up myself to where I am today. And I've said, I want to just mention that, given the choice today, I would do it all over, even if it was the hardest thing I've ever done, because it did bring me to fellow adoptees. It did bring me to ultimately myself,
Yeah.
and a myself that I really, today I can stand in confidence. Today I can stand here and say, like, I've worked on myself to a point of loving myself, and really being able to put myself first.
That's great. That's something I would wish for all of us to be able to reach that point if we have.
Yeah.
I have not, but I would love to get there for myself. So that's inspirational. Thank you for sharing that. But I know you've said since some of your more recent interviews, there have been other changes in your life that maybe people don't know about, that do follow your blog, or maybe the chance hasn't been there for you to share about those. Would you like to talk about any of those things?
Yeah, sure. So I think the biggest change for me has come since, so early 2021, I decided to take a little bit of time away from the blog and social media, which was big, because I think as an adoptee, the fear of FOMO is real. The idea of not checking in, like having grown sort of a following, and all of a sudden, the idea of just not checking in, the idea of not being engaging and always being present came with a huge fear of like, what if they forget about me? What if all of a sudden, I come back in 2 months and I have two followers? And logically understand that's not what would have happened, but it goes back to rejection, fear of abandonment, all those things, right? Where it was hard, but I did it. And in that time, I made sure to search out people to connect with who were not adoptees and be in conversations that were not centered on adoption, but people who were knowledgeable about trauma, people who were talking conversations where trauma was the topic. And what I found was that hearing from others who were not adoptees, but were talking about trauma, being able to relate to what they were saying, being able to say, that was my experience too. Those were my responses too. I've lived all of what you're talking about. I was able to kind of isolate out the adoption and say, you know what? I have been through trauma. And for me, it is the adoption. And it validated my experience. It made me feel more confident to speak on trauma as an adoptee, and just kind of know that I'm not making it up, stop gaslighting myself, and kind of break free from the Stockholm syndrome of not being able to call out the people that adopted me for not doing what they should have done and informing themselves better. And things like that would ultimately lead to like feeling more empowered in my own story and experience and taking ownership and no longer feeling as a victim. Like I've been the victim of certain things, but I'm no longer a victim of my life, right? It gave me that chance to say, well, I can work on myself now. I can put myself first. In 2021, I invested more time and effort into myself than I probably ever done. And it has had tremendous effects on my children, on my marriage, on myself, on my friendship, the way I show up in the world, the connections that I make, and how I'm able to sit and listen to people, how I'm able to be more authentic. I mean, authenticity is something we all struggle with, adoptees even more so, I think, because many times we don't even know ourselves. Between having been told a story and feeling a certain way, and society tells us, and we don't know, we sort of have to piece together our own reality in a way. And so I think I feel like I've finally been able to kind of do that. Like, this is me. If you like me as I am, cool. Let's embark on this life together. If not, that is okay too. I can handle that. And that took a lot of time, a lot of inner work, a lot of sitting with that, a lot of praying, a lot of speaking things out into the universe, whatever you believe in. But at the end of the day, just knowing that my life, my reality, it starts here and here. And so whatever is happening out here, whatever people tell me, I'll be okay. And
That's a lot of growth. Wow.
And I'm sharing that in a way to what I wish to do is to just show that it's possible, not say like, well, you can do it, so stop suffering where you are. Like it has to happen again from within. Right. So I want to make sure that I'm sharing where I am today, but this is not where I was 6 months ago. This is not where I was 2 years ago. So wherever you are in your journey, I want to hold space for you where you are, and we can talk. And if I can sort of show whatever things have helped me, and you want to try and apply that, awesome. But there's no pressure ever to like, well, look at me, I'm doing great. Why aren't you? Which I think it can be a tough balance sometimes. Once people get to a place of empowerment, they want to drag everybody else along and kind of forget that, it took you a while to get there. It's going to take everyone else a while too, if they're ever ready. You got to be where you are.
Yeah, thank you. That's I used the word inspirational before. It really is. Certainly is impacting me that way to hear that. And I'm digging into so many things for the first time as well, aspects of trauma. I didn't know about trauma until very recently. It certainly has impacted me that I know now that I can identify it and where things come from. But so I commend you for that. That's a significant journey that you've undertaken. And I know people are appreciative of what you've shared here about that. Would you like to take a minute to talk about either the blog or the the plaque on the wall, I know that that's part of an offering that you have on your website, very
Yeah.
inspirational as well, or motivational, or anything else that we haven't talked about that might be important to you.
Sure. I mean, I could probably, once I start, I can go on and on. But since you mentioned, I don't know if you can really see it, but I have it there because, so this is an adoptee mantra, I call it, that I wrote 2020, I think I wrote it up. And so it's kind of a compilation of phrases that I found were things I had struggled with and that I know that I've heard from other adoptees that they struggle with too. And I sort of put it into these little affirmations that the idea is kind of like, this is my message to myself and to you as a fellow adoptee. And they're on sale. Like, I sell them on the website. I'm so bad at like trying to market or sell anything, but they are on the website. If you want to check them out, I'm happy to. If you order one, I'm happy to send it out to you. And yeah, it's really just my message to fellow adoptees of kind of like, we can create that safety and that love from within that we didn't get from the people around us. Although we know we deserved it, although it really sucks that we didn't get it from the people that should have shown up for us. Today, I'm kind of choosing to show up for myself. And if I can help you do the same by giving you that message, then that's what I hope to do. And then the blog, I haven't been very active lately. I'm kind of slow right now on it, but yeah, I share my story there. I think it's 15 parts up so far. I also offer fellow adoptees who want to share their story and kind of dig into what that might feel like, writing up your story and have it published. You can send it to me and I will put it on the blog for people to read. And it's a way of kind of dipping your toes into sharing publicly, but doing it with the back of knowing that I got your back. I support you as a fellow adoptee, and the community around this adoptee life supports you and will encourage you when you share your story. So you're kind of doing it in a safe way and not just feeling like you're standing by yourself and fully exposing very vulnerably your story for the first time. And you can do it anonymously. You can choose to use a different name, anonymously, picture, no pictures. At the end of the day, it's about you sharing your story in a way that feels good for you. That's really it, because I felt like once I started sharing my story, I gained so much empowerment in that I want to offer that same opportunity to fellow adoptees. And I think writing our story, there's a lot of processing that goes on. So I really encourage fellow adoptees to write reflectively, write down their story. And it can change over time. My story has changed. The way I tell it has changed a lot. So if you read the first few posts, that's nothing like how I sound today. I should probably update that sometime soon. And then I have the podcast that's slowly kicking into gear, but it's the same idea of just giving the space to fellow adoptees to come on and share in a way they feel comfortable to get their stories out there, so that we can get more stories out there and just really create this movement, if you will, of adoptees sharing their stories, owning their stories, standing confidently in what is their truth, so that those coming after us can say, hey, it's not just me. I'm not an exception, because you got this podcast and you got that blog, and look here, you got hundreds of adoptees, thousands of adoptees. Like, the more of us that there are there, the harder it's going to be to dismiss us. It's kind of my vision and my purpose for what I'm doing.
Is the podcast the same name as the blog?
Yes, it's this Adoptee Life podcast.
People were asking. I thought it was. I just wanted to make sure that I keep.
Yeah, it's just a few episodes out now. But
oh, okay, great. Well, what a wonderful time. Thank you so much for sharing,
Thank
Amanda,
you.
being open with us. What I'll do is I'll end the recording session of the interview, and then we can go on to the next part that we discussed a minute ago. So thanks again.
Thank you.
And I will stop that right now.